You're listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast.
Hello everyone. I'd like to introduce Bridget McKenzie, and she'll be presenting with us later today. Bridget McKenzie is the first female Australian Agricultural Minister and Deputy Leader of the Nationals Party and Nationals Leader in the Senate. It really puts you above your weight here. She was elected as a Victorian Senator in 2010, re-elected in 2016, and again in 2019. She was born in rural Victoria in the small town of Alexander. We won't hold that against you. And raised to be a proud and passionate person looking after rural and regional Australia. As a long-term member of the Nationals, Bridget knows how important it is for people living in regional and remote Australia to have a strong voice and true representatives who will stand up for the rights of rural and regional Australians. That's why she has fought hard to deliver better access to high-quality healthcare, improved mobile black spot coverage across our capital cities, outside your capital cities, and creating jobs and driving economic growth in our regions. Please join me in welcoming Minister McKenzie.
Well, thanks, Karen. What a fantastic introduction. Congratulations to the new President, Stacey. It's fantastic to be here on your first luncheon, and I know you're going to do a great job. And Trent, where are you? This is the power of social media. I have loved this guy and everything he tweets for years, and to finally physically meet him is a great highlight of today, Trent. So lovely to meet you and see you. And to all the rural press in this room, in a media landscape that is becoming about monologues and a monoculture that's increasingly urbanised, your voice, how you use your pen, your Twitter feed, your blog, your newspaper, your radio, is increasingly important to ensure that our industries, our communities, our people, our way of life continues to be told and heard outside of our communities. So thank you for the work you do each and every day. G'day, Susie. Great to be in your state. And Queensland is very, very lucky to have such a strong and experienced voice for regional Queensland as part of our Senate team. So I'm really enjoying working. Yes, she deserves a clap. And obviously, to the President of the Nationals, you've always got to thank your boss, Larry. Great to be here. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we're meeting today and pay my respects to elders past and present. Today I really want to touch on the prosperous future that agriculture has and the forward-thinking agenda that I'm hoping as Minister for Agriculture and our government, the Liberal National Partnership in Canberra, hopes to provide a framework for our entrepreneurial, forward-thinking, hard-working primary producers across this nation to use them to do what they do best, to grow and to prosper. But it is great to be back in the great state of Queensland and to see so many from the food and fibre industries here across the state. QFF, AgForce, I know Georgie can't be with us, it took a bull to get her down, but she sends her best. Last election, there were a lot of surprises. Put up your hand if you were surprised. Come on, we can all admit it. But there was one event that really, I think, changed the dial for that election and also really brought a message home that we all know about out in the regions, but to the broader community. And it was the reaction by Central Queensland in particular to the cavalcade of cars that drove all the way from Melbourne to Queensland to tell Queenslanders that they couldn't have a mine. Now, I'm from regional Victoria and I love Melbourne. Don't hold that against me. It's a former role as sports minister, took me a while to work out code of football, but I am a Maroon at heart because we all hate New South Wales. The fact is that Melbourne was built on mining, gold mining. So who does Melbourners, Southerners, think they are saying that Queenslanders can't do the same thing, albeit a couple of hundred years later? But the same also goes for our other key regional industry in this country. Bearing in mind, agriculture and mining, 80% of this nation's exports from those two areas of industry based out in regional Australia. The same goes for agriculture. We've now got people telling us that farming is bad, that our agricultural industries are morally wrong, and that all the animals need to be freed. I seriously got a letter from high school kids the other day asking me to stop forcing the chickens from having to lay so many eggs. Seriously, this is what comes across the desk of the Agriculture Minister. But the fact is, in working to feed and clothe people, there is hardly a more morally justifiable industry. And this is an industry, as the new Agriculture Minister, I know my party and my government will fight to defend. Yesterday I read a Queensland Country Life article, and well done to AgForce, where Mike was talking with pride and passion about the agricultural community showed in voicing their opposition to the now justifiably defunct Reef Protection Bill here in your home state. I raise this because it's an example of what we can actually achieve when our community finds its voice and stands united. As animal activists have admitted in a recent parliamentary inquiry in Victoria, their actual end goal is not about animal welfare. Their end goal is to end livestock production in this country. Now, there goes the end of our $16 billion red meat industry, which underpins much of regional Queensland's prosperity. And yes, I know Rockhampton is the beef capital of Australia. At the federal level, we're progressing farm trespass legislation for the very reasons I spoke about. People have a right to make a living from food and fibre. In fact, our nation's economy depends on it. Agriculture serves as the cornerstone for our economy, producing $800 billion across the supply chain and employing over 1.6 million Australians. 1.6 million Australians depend on their livelihoods as a result of food and fibre production. What your stand here in this state did against more red tape designed to stop you getting on with business is that when we speak up as an industry and as a community, Australians choose to back us. In the first 3 months as Ag Minister, I've travelled to each state and met with hundreds of people who contribute day in and day out to this important sector. Mango producers in Bowen, cattlemen in Rockhampton, tuna fishermen in Port Lincoln. In Queensland, despite considerable impediments that you've been going through for many, many years now, including the droughts and natural disasters, your exports are up from $7.7 billion in 2012 to over $8.8 billion in the last financial year. In 2017-18, your meat and live animals represented 29% of all exports in this state and have grown 67% over the last 5 years. Our government's role is to support you to do what you're already doing, to get out of your way, make sure you've got a regulatory framework, a research and development framework that helps you to be your very best. That's what our government's job is to do. More prosperous, more sustainable. Despite the tough seasons, and I've been on the ground in Quilpin, I got a chance to spend New Year's in Alpha, the terrible floods in North Queensland have wreaked havoc and devastation, I guess, across much of Queensland. And Minister David Littleproud has done a fantastic job in supporting those communities and instilling a range of responses from our government to support them in the immediate, but also to get back on their feet through the recovery phase. Our drought support and flood relief contribute to keeping the foundations of this industry strong and ready for the recovery, because we know that we've got to be not just physically ready for the recovery when the rain comes, but mentally ready to seize the opportunities that will bring. I'm a firm believer that the best days of our farmers, our fishers and our foresters are ahead of us. That's why our government has set a clear goal, making each and one of our primary producers part of a goal to see this industry grow from $60 billion last year to $100 billion industry by 2030. That'll take a concerted and coordinated push, and government and industry, and the state governments in particular, have a role to play. We've got to promote more trade, increase market access. Underpinning everything we do is that biosecurity piece, so we need to safeguard that biosecurity, pest and disease-free status. We've got to boost our productivity and profitability through increasing innovation and research and development. And we have to ensure that we've got the right workforce in the right place at the right time of the season with the right skills. And though there's a critical infrastructure piece to make that all happen, not just physical, inland roads, beef roads, etc., but increasingly the digital connectivity that will really enhance agricultural production. For me, export growth is at the very heart of growing Australian agriculture. We export 70% of what we produce. That's a fact. So we can't eat more. In fact, there's people trying to stop us eating more in this country. But we need to get more of that safe, clean, green, reliable produce into markets around the world. But it is increasingly becoming more competitive. Ukraine produces a pretty good grain now. South America producing some pretty good beef, where maybe 20 years ago we had the cutting edge. So we need to be increasingly focused on our safe food proposition to the world. I'll talk about productivity and innovation shortly, but on agricultural trade more specifically, we've continued to lead the way in opening up more opportunities to get our fantastic, safe and sustainable food and fibre to markets overseas. We've secured the CPTPP. We're delivering high-quality free trade agreements with Canada and Mexico, two of the world's top 20 economies, and we're delivering further improvements to the Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement. Our FTAs with our three northern neighbours, China, Korea and Japan, continue to deliver strong opportunities for our agriculture, and we've concluded negotiations, as we all know, with Indonesia and Hong Kong, which is going to open significant opportunities. We're currently negotiating with the EU, and we'll see how that goes, and depending what happens with Boris over the coming days, we're looking forward to starting negotiations, obviously, with the UK post-Brexit. It was great to travel last week throughout Japan, Korea and Vietnam with a group of producers from across the country, and I think we took Justin Slaughter, are you here? Yes, so and Ben Martin from the mango industry here in Queensland were part of the delegation that we went. I guess that trip really showed me the immense value of the access wins we've had in these markets for agriculture, the preferential deals we've been able to enjoy, and the need for us to continue to build relationships in existing markets because the competitors are coming. Minister Takatori in Japan and I, whilst bonding over our mutual love of sports shooting, I'm looking for a property where I can take him feral pig hunting when he comes over to Australia. Put your hands up later. But we also were talking about the increased competition for Australian beef in this market from the USA beef agreement with Japan that is currently being negotiated by Prime Minister Abe and President Trump. Our long-standing relationship with Japan is evidenced by mutual co-investment in agribusinesses and right across the supply chain, but we can't take that for granted. Opportunities for Australian horticulture into a market like Korea are immense, including the immediate horizon of mainland cherry exports. The proactive work by producers in country, accessing our increased investment as a government in agricultural counsellors in those three markets, means that those producers and exporters that want to engage can. My encouragement, though, is to get out there and get into market and make that happen. Finally, there is such an exciting opportunity represented by Vietnam. My meeting with Minister Keong was positive and constructive. I made clear to the Minister that any importation of whole uncooked prawns from Vietnam will have to wait until we've conducted our comprehensive review following the white spot outbreak, but didn't stop him for asking. But our two nations have decided to double our agricultural exports trade between each other over coming years. The two Prime Ministers agreed to that. It is an exciting proposition of partnering our know-how, our product with into their supply chains and then exporting to third countries in our region. Super opportunities in Vietnam, and incredibly excited to extend that. We've reinvigorated the Australian-Vietnam Business Forum, and I invited him to Australia early next year for a Vietnamese beer made with Australian barley. So he's eagerly accepted that, and he'll be bringing a delegation over of Vietnamese agribusiness entrepreneurs to connect with our community over here. So look, watch out for that. There's new breakthroughs every week on the trade front. They may not make headlines, but they're all helpful to our farmers to develop new partnerships. Just last week, we regained access to the United States for raw pork products, as well as access to Singapore for our free-range egg producers. Announcements like this help keep the value of our food and fibre exports ticking up. And on the trade front and across every front, you can rely on our government to keep fighting to secure the best free trade deals for our farmers and to be then negotiating market access protocols as quickly as we can. Our reputation as a nation as a reliable supplier of safe, sustainable and high-quality produce is down to our biosecurity system. But increasing pressure from people movement, increasing cargo trade, we've had a 172% increase on mail over the last decade, means the risk is increasing, and it's our entire value proposition to the world. We're not cheaper to produce things. Our competitors are increasingly getting us green. We need to continue to promote our safety as a food supplier. And so if we're going to get to $100 billion by 2030, we've got to jealously guard that competitive advantage and protecting the $6 trillion worth of environmental and economic and agricultural assets from pest and disease. African swine fever, you might have seen it in the paper recently, is potentially the biggest animal disease event the world has ever seen, and it's marching south through Asia towards Australia. That's why tomorrow I've called an emergency roundtable to be chaired by our Chief Veterinary Officer, Mark Shipp, who's also President of the International Organisation for Animal Health. The roundtable will serve as an initial discussion of the market effects of African swine fever on the global protein and grain supply and the challenges and opportunities this presents for Australia. If you're a beef exporter at the moment with certification into China, they cannot get enough of the product you're selling. And because of our trade tensions, obviously there's reasons for those still waiting in the queue for that certification. But that's why there are opportunities present for this. So we've got AMIC coming, APL, MLA and sheep producers, as well as scientists and state governments from across the country tomorrow. So I'll be holding a press conference following the roundtable and that discussion around the next steps. To grow, we also need to be clever and courageous. We need an innovation system that supports farmer productivity and profitability right across the supply chain. We're pretty good at it. Did you know the surf ski? Put up your hands if you knew this, because I actually didn't, so maybe I'm. Did you know the surf ski that is now so useful in rescuing our tourists at Bondi Beach was actually invented by two brothers outside Port Macquarie so they could actually check their oyster beds back in 1912. The ute from Geelong, the cast wine from Renmark, the self-propelled rotary hoe from Gilgandra and the stump jump plough from the Mallee. These inventions really showcase the innovation that has always been a natural part of our scientists and our primary producers. The CSIRO has had some great inventions, including BT cotton, which has actually reduced the use of insecticides by 92% in Australian cotton production, which has actually helped cotton grow to the $2 billion industry it is today, and it's been great for our environment. Taxpayers have been part of funding our past innovation breakthroughs, whether through the CSIRO or our research and development corporations, and they'll continue to do so. We need to ensure our research delivers value for both the taxpayer and the levy payer. Each year our farmers, through their levies, invest almost $500 million in research, development and marketing. The Australian Government and the taxpayer provides matching funding of around $300 million for eligible R&D expenditure. There's no doubt that when the Rural Research and Development Corporations were first created about 4 decades ago, around the same time as this press club, the system was world-leading. Back then, though, as journalists, you manually sent the papers out each night, and there was no Google search for the tough questions or research you needed to do to finish your article. Just as journalism has changed, so too must the R&D system. Agricultural productivity is slowing and has been since the 1990s. And as the Treasurer has highlighted, our country's productivity growth is also slowing, down to 1.1% over the last 5 years from 1.5%. The RDC system needs to evolve to focus on delivering benefits to producers, to enable them to jump ahead of global competitors. We need less duplication, greater collaboration to deliver real productivity and profitability back to the farm gate and the taxpayer. The Ernst & Young report, commissioned by the former Agriculture Minister, ranked our rural innovation system as 20th in the world, even though we've got more researchers than the US or the Netherlands, who both made the top 10. But tellingly, during that report's construction, 80% of those interviewed about our research and development, our innovation system, called for reform. And as I've travelled around the country and spoken with levy payers, spoken with RDC chairs, there has been similarly a recognition that this system that served us so well needs reform for the next section of the 21st century and beyond. In looking at reform, we need to consider all the options. One theoretical policy option is to let the market decide how much is invested in research and development. Take the public investment out of it altogether, and many countries overseas have used that approach. Another was proposed by Labor at the last election, where they referred back to the 2011 Productivity Commission report, and we're going to halve the taxpayer investment co-contribution into research and development. And these are both valid approaches, but they won't be approaches that our government will be supporting. I remain completely committed to the co-contribution of the Australian taxpayer and the levy payer in funding research and development. It is unique in the world, and it actually, I think, particularly at this point in time where there is a disconnectedness between the broader Australian taxpayer and the contribution that agriculture makes to their own way of living and their standard of living, that they get a broader benefit from agriculture doing well. So that won't be being changed. The current funding arrangements for RDCs provide a shared commitment, and I consider our government's responsibility to ensure we put this money to work and make a real difference on the ground for our producers and our regional communities, not just now, but in decades to come. So I've heard a range of views about the possible future shape of what our RDC model could look like. Some of the suggestions are structural. So do we want an additional RDC as well as the current 15? Would the new RDC focus on work across industry sectors? Should there be fewer RDCs? If so, how many and with what role? And I noticed the red meat industry has had a go at grappling with some of those incredibly difficult questions. Should the RDCs be mandated to spend a minimum across common questions through the system? Should they be performing advocacy? What's the role of marketing? Do I need to pay 5 levies plus my SFO plus my PIC? I mean, these are serious questions that when you're on the ground talking to producers, they want answers to. There are many, many different ideas. It's a complex area, but we need to be open and constructive about a future state that will put the investment of levy payers and the taxpayers to best use. Now, in flagging these ideas, I don't want every RDC coming, or farming body for that matter, advocacy body, coming and saying why their organisation's super awesome and are better than all the rest and that they've got the answer. My challenge to all of us, because I started a Senate inquiry a few years ago into the red meat industry following a boycott at the Barnawatha sale yards by our processors. And what that taught me, I guess, through listening and hearing various views, is that there's a lot of informal and formal conflicts in these systems that we have. And to get the best result for producers and indeed our nation, we need to leave our vested interests at the door and behind and work in the national interest for reform that will put our agricultural industries, our primary producers, in the best position for the 21st century. So today I announce I'll create an advisory body to provide options on reform opportunities for the R&D systems by early next year. I'll be making specific announcements of the roadmap in coming weeks, including a discussion paper that will be released on September the 23rd to guide our engagement. I'm committed for this process to be inclusive and ensure that all who have a stake get to have a say on the future of our innovation system. The key areas, the guiding questions, if you like, of that discussion paper, and the things I've heard, that we're spending too much time on short-term priorities and on the concerns of individual sectors. Some consolidation of our mechanisms for planning and procuring research is needed. The only people benefiting, some levy payers would argue, are the academics. How much and in what form needs to be worked through. There's scope for reducing duplication through better collaboration and organisational structures. Higher quality industry advocacy is needed. Many of our peak industry councils are struggling for funds to actually do the really critical work of advocating for their industries. We need to make sure they're appropriately funded. Better communications with producers and transmission of the research. As states have withdrawn from extension services, we've got all this great stuff happening at this level of the system, but is it actually being delivered onto at the farm gate? I think that's very mixed across the RDC system. And finally, we need to have more of our knowledge products commercialised and make sure that the levy payers can actually see return on their investment at the farm gate. Science has always driven the profitability and productivity of the Australian agricultural sector. We're world renowned for our use of science. The current regulatory system, a bit like our RDC system, is creeping towards the big 3-0. So it's been 3 decades since we've actually set up the national registration for agricultural and veterinary chemicals. And since it's been set up, we had 7,000 when we started, we've got over 12,000 now. These products are needed to keep Australians healthy, our animals healthy, our environment healthy, and they guarantee and underpin the integrity of our ag sector. But the regulatory framework needs to suit the 21st century. So today, I announce a comprehensive independent review of the ag vet chemical regulatory system. The review is a first principles review to look at the framework underpinning the national registration scheme for ag vet chemicals. Assessing the appropriateness, effectiveness and efficiency of the current framework, articulates the goals of the regulatory system and considers Australia's regulatory requirements, and it will provide me with recommendations for reform of the system. Mr Ken Matthews, AO, will chair the expert panel to provide these recommendations to me by February 2021. He's renowned for his integrity, depth of knowledge and his insightful policy thinking, and he'll be supported by Dr Mary Corbett, Dr Suan, Dr Austin, who will together bring the expertise in regulation, agricultural production, veterinary medicines and human health. They'll be consulting widely with stakeholders throughout the review process, so I look forward to receiving regular updates. Just want to briefly touch on one of the barriers or handbrakes to us actually reaching our goal of $100 billion industry by 2030. And that's the workforce piece. Whilst it's not my direct responsibility, it is something we absolutely have to get right. We need a system that actually recognises we need a visa system that has a suite of options to assist a variety of industries to get the right work in the right place at the right time of the season. But also, I want to see Australians recognising they can have a prosperous, rewarding career in the agricultural industry for the 21st century. So there is a big work to do in the domestic space. You've seen Longreach and Emerald close. We do not be needing to teach young people in Australia how to mend their saddles and stitch saddles. What we need to do is teach them how to fly drones. This is an exciting, globally focused, high-tech industry. There is no reason why we can't grow our own workforce. And that's why we're establishing an Agricultural Labour Advisory Committee. It will be chaired by 3 experts, one in the immigration space, one in agricultural education, and a final one who has actual experience of hiring and sometimes having to fire skilled staff in agricultural industry. So we get that really practical, hands-on knowledge. They'll be constructing a strategy for government to implement. I'd just briefly like to touch on the difficulties in the horticultural industry, particularly given the introduction of the new Horticulture Award in early April, ongoing claims of worker exploitation within the industry and the increasingly difficulties of sourcing seasonal labourers. Producers who are doing the right thing, and that's the vast majority of them, in hiring and paying their workers, are being penalised by our retailers who continue to purchase the cheaper box of fruit or veg from the wholesalers. And yes, I'm talking about Coles and Woolworths and other retailers. They need to take a stand where it counts, in the marketplace, and back the producers that are doing the right thing, not those who are able to produce the product at a cheaper cost because they're underpaying their workers. It's time to stand up and put your money where your mouth is. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the mechanisms in place to support and sustain our fantastic food and fibre production. The reforms announced today will create an environment that will help our farmers, fishers and foresters to continue to succeed. Getting ag to 100 billion by 2030 won't be easy, but it is achievable if we all work together. Success will look like higher income for our primary producers, buoyant economies out across regional Australia, an increased contribution to our nation's GDP from agriculture, and happy, healthy customers for our food and fibre right across the world. History shows we regional Australians are a pretty adaptable bunch. It's the innovation and hard work of farmers and exporters that's taken agriculture to $60 billion, and by government supporting them with the regulatory framework and facilitation and research and development skill sets, they'll be able to continue to grow. They need us to have a 21st century system to back their drive and entrepreneurial skills. That's my commitment to you today, and I really look forward to working with each and every one of you to that end over the next 3 years, but hopefully 6. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast. To book a ticket to our next event, visit our website at ruralpressclub.com.au. Music supplied by audionautics.com.